Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. A little sensitive, definitely serious, maybe some trigger warning, so be ready. What's something that you felt that was completely normal in your childhood, but didn't realize until adulthood that it wasn't? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. That my grandma used to take her medicine with her nose. Having a cooler in the car, my parents always packed one. There were Cokes and waters in it. The weird part was there was also always beer in it. Didn't matter if we were going 12 hours or 1 hour. They packed a cooler. Didn't realize how much my mom was drinking until years later when she became a non-functioning alcoholic. My mom used the bathroom as a form of control, both showering and using the potty. You know what's really weird? That I had to ask my mother to take me to the bathroom even as a teenager. Not permission to use it. She had to be there. I thought this was completely normal for non-adults. When I got my period, my mother acted like it was the most embarrassing thing in the world. I was not given pads or tampons. I had to use my little sister's diapers and pull-ups. I didn't even know pads existed. When I was a kid, I thought that all Korean candy stores were free. Like you could go in, take what you wanted, and leave. I would make friends with other Korean kids, take them to my favorite candy stores and tell them to help themselves, which they did. So apparently, whenever we'd visit my family in Korea, my dad would talk to all the candy shop owners in the neighborhood and tell them to put anything me or my friends took on a tab. Maybe it was because I barely even spoke Korean, but that whole situation just seemed perfectly effing normal to my oblivious little self. In hindsight, I realized that what I thought was freedom was actually neglect. Kids aren't supposed to be left to themselves in such a degree that they end up raising themselves. From personal experience, doing so leads to a lot of misunderstandings on how things are supposed to be. I got 3 hits with a belt by my dad every time I struck out in youth baseball or missed a tackle in pee-wee football. Bleeding was very common, and my ass would turn black and purple. I thought I deserved it. My teachers caught on when I wasn't able to sit down at school. This was around 2nd grade. Nothing happened. I suppose he made up some bullshit excuse for why I had horrible bruises. And this continued on until I stood up for myself one night in middle school. I don't remember that night at all, but he beat the shit out of me. It was that night that I realized that everything he had done to me and my little sister was straight up child abuse. Why do parents like this exist? How can a father relentlessly beat their children for small failures? He also isn't a drunk or a drug addict. He did everything completely sober. Being able to fix things myself. My dad is an engineer, and throughout my childhood, we'd come up with random creative projects to build stuff. He'd show me how to fix things and what safety precautions to look out for. Now, if something happens at my flat, I know how to fix it, or I call my dad and he'll guide me. My boyfriend and friends have no idea how I know this stuff or how to do these things themselves. I always thank my dad. It's great because I get to save a lot of money, and I've saved money for my friends too. Also, it means a lot to me because at the time and the town I was in, girls weren't encouraged to do engineering, but my dad didn't care. I was a little girl and thought it was essential for me to know how to do these things myself. I think he also hoped I'd one day become an engineer. Focusing on the positive that are in these stories today, I love this. What a great representation of a parent right there. So you learned a couple of great skills, you can impress your friends, and that'll last you your whole life. So great job. My mom never cooked, and there would be a lot of nights where I went without food because she didn't buy any. I thought it was normal for a mom to sleep the majority of the day. In reality, she was always effed up on painkillers. Then, with my grandmother, she was controlling over whatever clothes, shoes, and how my hair looked. I always had to look like a good Christian boy. I showed up to school with my first black eye at 6 years old. By the time I was around 7 or 8, I started getting punished with electrical extensions. My thighs and forearms with welts, sometimes blood was drawn. By the time I was 10, I got my facial scars, whereby my mom dug her fingernails deep. All those years, I thought it was a normal way for a parent to teach a kid to behave. My mom was an elementary school teacher. That's why no teacher ever stepped in. By the time I became a dad, I think I spanked my daughter once before realizing that was not normal. I started using words instead, and 20 plus years later, things came up okay. My dad would drink and drive literally everywhere. When I was young, I loved grabbing him a fresh one from the cooler because it was my dad and I didn't know any different. I still have him even though it was effed up. Playing with mercury bare hands, eating Tylenol tabs as candy, no one ever told me it was medicine, eating grass and weeds, buying alcohol at 15 and drinking it at school, or loose cigarettes from my parents. Pretty sure there's more. The 90s in Mexico was a little crazy. Learned we wouldn't be doing Santa the next year because he was burned alive in our fireplace. Whoa. Dad left his black boots in the fireplace as proof. Update. Each year prior, he would use his boots with soot to make footprints to the tree and back in the carpet. So when it was time to stop Santa, Santa burned up in our fireplace. Same with the Easter Bunny. Someone mentioned something similar. Our dogs were given some pillows to tear up. Sorry kids, no more Easter Bunny. I thought this was hilarious as an adult, 40 now, but told friends and their response was more shock, and that explains a lot about you. Parental figure has since apologized. I still think it's funny. Since I was a kid with undiagnosed autism, I was understandably annoying or difficult, and my parents didn't really know the correct way to parent me. I apparently annoyed my older sister so much she'd beat me up, pin me down, or spit on me, slam my head on the hardwood floor, call me slurs, leave me alone at the park when I was too young to walk back myself, hit me when I tried to hug her, that sort of stuff. My parents tried to stop it sometimes, but it didn't work. When I got older, I was hanging around after psychology class once, and I can't remember why, but in the midst of a conversation I mentioned this jokingly, and my psych teacher said, "X, I'm so sorry." Really surprised me that someone was taking me seriously. A couple years later, I mentioned to my dad it really messed me up, and I wished they'd done more. The first time I mentioned it, he said I was just trying to bring up old drama. Second time, he said they didn't know it was that often or bad. It was almost every time I was around her. I love my dad, but I wish he tried harder. I wish people took kids seriously when they say their siblings hit them. It's not always just how siblings play. I needed help. Everyone always brushed me off. Having a room full of dictionaries, I was baffled when I met kids in secondary school as an adult doing a teacher training course at the time who didn't even understand the basics of how to use one in their own language, let alone a two-language one. My dad was a translator, so growing up it was just a normal thing, and I would sometimes just take one and look up random words in different languages for fun. Every Christmas, my parents would buy me and my siblings one Christmas ornament to decorate the tree, which typically highlighted a special event or something important or a topic we were highly interested in that year. The tree started off rather bare at first, but after 5 kids and 25 years, that thing was filled from top to bottom and shows a history of our lives. I thought it was how everyone decorated family home Christmas trees for a while, but apparently it's pretty unique to us. I absolutely love that. What a wonderful tradition. And I think you inspired me to start something next year. So thank you, really. I thought all the kids knew how to cook in kindergarten. I got confused when teachers would say, "What is your mom cooking for dinner?" or whatever. But then I knew people in high school who only knew how to cook eggs and toast. I learned to cook when I was 7, home alone taking care of my addict sister while my parents constantly worked. I also thought wanting to go to the dentist was normal until I heard so many people complain about being scared to go. The only time I went to a doctor as a minor was because I couldn't walk due to a kidney infection, when my mom begrudgingly took me and said I was exaggerating. I also never went to the dentist. I was almost mute for years because I thought nobody cared what I had to say and assumed nobody would like me. Teachers, extended family always said, "Smile," but I always told them I have nothing to smile about, which looking back was really emo to say at 7, but I genuinely think I've had depression my whole life. Things have gotten better, but I still feel like people won't like me if I am not useful to them. Like in relationships, I do 100% of the cooking and cleaning. I've worked second jobs, etc., because I feel like they don't actually care. So I guess I always thought depression was normal. I thought that thinking about death in 2nd grade was normal. Being taught to care about everybody, regardless of race, religion, or politics. We were lower middle class farmers, and we played with everyone. Everybody was welcome in my parents' home. We had a ginormous garden, and my parents gave our neighbors food out of it. My parents taught if you give out love, it's returned tenfold. Needless to say, that bit us in the butt sometimes, but my parents died living and believing that. I thought kids were supposed to play toys or games in complete silence. Anything causing noise needed to be done outside. Moms are happiest when you're not home. Gentle slaps and pinches instead of hugs were how moms showed love. I also thought any medical problem was an annoyance to my mom rather than a concern. I also thought kids had to barter for attention, like, "Mom, I'll go play with some friends until dinner, but can I ask you for advice first or talk to you later about this?" Every one of these threads highlight terrible things that happened as kids. I'm going to do the opposite because I had awesome parents. They had me enrolled in summer classes at the Science Center for my entire childhood. My parents were never rich, about dead center of the middle class, but they were thrifty in general and got lucky with assuming a very affordable mortgage. It was the 80s. That was possible back then. So, they spent some money to get me signed up for daily science classes during the summer, every summer, through middle school. These were hands-on and fun and really helped foster my love of science. I now have a PhD and run my own lab. I have them to thank for this. Awesome. Okay, this is really dark, so trigger warning, everything. In my younger years, I thought that almost daily R's and filming of said R's by my stepmom was just doing my part for the family and God, by offering my body as a worthy sacrifice. I thought it was just an extremely unpleasant thing every kid went through as part of their godly duty. However, I was extremely isolated from civilization, so I had no one to corrupt my mind with selfishness or entitlement. Guilt and obligation to people please. I was raised that you listen. Adults know best and aren't to be argued with. Whenever I saw fault in what they were saying or doing and tried to question, whether to rebel or get them to see something wasn't right, I got in so much trouble, and I would be so confused because it was obvious. My mom chose questionable and horrible men, so it only got worse. At some point, I just went into okay obedience, keep things quiet, and gets me noticed less, which led to constantly just doing as I was told and how horrible I was for ever thinking or wanting anything for me as a kid. Everything had to be for or with others in mind. Pair that with a love of doing things for people, enjoying seeing them happy, and I just grew up messy because of it. I still can't grasp things in the and that anything remotely for myself feels selfish. It doesn't feel to help that people treat me like I'm selfish for it or like I expect so much. But then people also treat the things I do for them as weird of me to do. Meanwhile, someone else doing the same is such a sweet, thoughtful friend. I don't get it at all. Sometimes I give up and people are like, "What's wrong with you? You used to be so nice." There's just no effing winning with anyone. My parents divorced right in the middle of my first grade school year. That was an improvement. They fought like cats and dogs the last year they were together, and I have trouble understanding how they even got together in the first place. That's another story though. The first couple years were rough for my mom. It was the very early 80s, and she was raising 2 kids on her own. My dad did pay child support and had us on some weekends, but it was pretty much up to my mom. My older sister was 10 and I was 7. She had 0 money for childcare, so my sister was pretty much forced to look after me after school. Fortunately, we have always been very close, and she's always been a responsible person. We didn't think anything was all that odd about the situation, just that it was how things were. My mom told me she didn't want us to tell anyone at work we were home alone and gave some reason about office gossip or something. I didn't realize it was because she was scared she'd get in trouble or lose us. At one point, I did slip up and say something, but nothing ever happened to her, fortunately. Because of this, I learned how to cook way early, and my sister and I became very self-sufficient. Also, I went to school with a number of kids in the same situation, so we were never really thought it was unusual. The first couple years were rough because mom was in sales, and it was a pretty bad economy for a while. But things started to look up for her, and she met her second husband a couple of years later. I really didn't realize how hard she had it until I was older, but my mom has always been a strong and resilient woman. Some of my cousins had both their parents the whole time they were growing up, and they didn't turn out as well as we did. I thought it was normal to dive into research and learn as much about something as possible when you took an interest. I had a million interests and a lot of anxiety since early grade school over what I wanted to be when I grew up because of that. I took up a lot of hobbies here and there, studied certain topics on my own time, and daydreamed a lot. I still very much do all of this, and let me tell you, having money to actually do things is a blessing and a curse. I'm getting tested for ADHD next week, lol. Side blurb. My parents were definitely not perfect, but I realize as an adult that they were breaking some serious cycles with their children. I give them grace for that. They're continuously trying to do better with themselves too. I can relate to some of these other posts, but as I got to know more about my parents' childhoods, I can see how much they were trying to shield us from. Minus the whole having money part, I really related with a lot of what you said. I did a lot of research. I would dive into something and was just like all in on a topic, and then you'd move on. And I was a latchkey kid, like a lot of people in these stories as well. So, great to hear from a lot of you. I'm sorry for all the trauma, but some of these were actually good. Not money. Having many races as friends. I'm a black woman who had best friends that were Indian, white, Mexican, African, you name it. I didn't know people were different races until I got older. I thought having different ethnicities in your circle was normal. Sadly, it was actually other kids who would ask me why I was hanging around other races. Didn't realize many people were against interracial dating either. Wasn't raised that way at all, and still don't understand why racism exists today. Heading out walking every weekend, trespassing across farmland. This was in England. My dad was adamant we were allowed to walk wherever we wanted and loved arguments with farmers and landowners. We'd head out with my two brothers, park up somewhere on a grass verge, climbing over walls, barbed wire, and just wandered across fields, avoiding bulls, mud, and farmhouses. If anyone stopped us, my dad started arguing about obscure laws from 100 years ago that said he could go where he wanted. I now know it was mostly nonsense, although trespass in England is a civil, not a criminal offense. When other people at school said they'd been on walks, I presumed they all did the same thing, not realizing England has one of the biggest public footpath networks in the world, and loads of places we could have gone where we wouldn't have been shouted at. I thought it was normal to be a second parent as the oldest child. There's a large age gap between my siblings and I. From the age of 10, I was tasked with being the nurturing parent in the house because our mother was mentally ill. I changed diapers, put the kids to sleep with stories and songs, made sure they had everything for school, played games, gave the talk, and tried to make good memories. But I was also expected to punish them accordingly. I was my mother's best friend and therapist, covering for her when she came home drunk or flew off the handle, even though I was severely depressed and suicidal. I'm almost 30, and I still beat myself up for the ways I failed them when I was younger, even though I know it wasn't normal to be in that position to begin with. I'm just now learning to take care of myself because for so long I didn't really matter.